I can try to skip over some of the introductory stuff here. So who here is familiar with Tails? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we got about 5 or 6 people. That's good. Throughout the course of the presentation, any clarifying questions, feel free to ask. Anything that may be a little more in-depth or of a open-ended kind of nature, let's try to keep to the end. I don't want to deprive you guys of lunch because of my lateness. So I am Forrest Barth. I'm a penetration tester at Security Metrics. Big privacy advocate. I volunteered at the Crypto and Privacy Village at DEF CON last year. And yeah, that's enough about me. Anyway, so as far as the scope of this talk, we're going to cover what Tails is, who is it that uses Tails, and why, as well as some of the mechanisms that it uses to achieve what it does, and also how to get started using it yourself. Some of the things that I won't cover are more in-depth means of anonymous computing, things like Unix, CubesOS, Corridor, things like that. If you want to talk about that, we can meet at lunch and discuss those things a little bit more in depth. So first off, what is Tails? It is a live Linux distro. It's Debian-based. Allows you to boot to a full operating system and not leave a trace behind. So if anybody here is familiar with Knoppix, kind of a similar concept, it allows you to do all anonymous online browsing. So all traffic from the distribution excuse me, is routed through Tor, the onion routing network. So it makes it a lot more difficult to trace you. There are some things that you can do to blow your own cover, so operational security does apply. But as far as the operating system goes, it uses IP tables to block any direct outside communication. So if the operating system is able to become compromised, somebody could then potentially alter those IP tables and cause a leak that way. But if you're dealing with something that sophisticated, you're probably going to want to shift your focus to something a little more advanced. We'll talk a little bit more about threat modeling later. All right, so Tails originally started out as a distribution called Incognito. That lasted for about a year. It was in about 2008. That was a Gen 2 derivative, and it was originally released in January, and I think by August they had kind of shut down shop. Tails came about the following year. I believe the first release was in June. Yeah, June 2009, there I go. And the developers, the Tails development team, all anonymous. There are maybe very select few people who are actually in the know of who's behind this. Everything that they do, their signing key is signed by the Debian development team. So I'm sure someone there is probably in the know of who that is, or they themselves may actually be involved. Who knows? A lot of the funding for Tails comes from the Tor project, and as a result, kind of the trickle-down effect, a lot of the funding for Tor project comes from State Department, Department of Defense, things like that. So it's kind of funny that this anonymizing technology is funded by some of the very people who wish to subvert that. Does raise some questions, but I think looking I'm not going to say it's tinfoil hat, because it is a good thing to really question where things are coming from and what motivations are behind it. But I'd rather look at the tool itself as the primary focus. So, why should you care about privacy? There's probably the biggest concern is the chilling effects of pervasive mass surveillance. Just knowing that what you're doing could potentially be watched by somebody will change your behavior, even unintentionally. It's said that you give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth. Well, I see some truth to that statement, although I believe a better way of looking at it would be give a man a mask and he'll reveal his true nature. I mean, you look on something like 4chan where there's anonymity and there's tons of trolls. Well, what does that say about the person? They are looking for cheap laughs. They lack empathy and don't really want to push forward a discussion. So that's, while they're not speaking the truth, their truer nature is revealed by that. A really good quote that I heard one time was, if you can be told what you can see or read, then it follows that you can be told what to say or think. It comes from a track called One Very Important Thought by a group called Boards of Canada, if you've ever heard of them. So I think that's a really, really strong, powerful statement. Censorship just stifles any sort of discussion, and I think it really represses forward progress. Any information that is collected through mass surveillance or tracking, things like that, it can be edited, manipulated, misconstrued. Somebody can put together different details to try and give a different story. There is a really good talk called Don't Talk to Police. It's put on by a lawyer. It's a two-part talk. The first half of the talk is the lawyer basically explaining all the different scenarios in which anything you say to police can be misconstrued or used against you, even if you're telling the truth. It is an amazing talk. The way that it's broken down is, if you're completely innocent and you're completely telling the truth, completely complicit, they can still turn it against you and pin you for something that you didn't do. It's a Don't Talk to Police. Just look it up on YouTube.
As a police officer telling him basically everything he said was right.
Yeah. So he gives the second half of his talk to a police officer who I think then went on to become a prosecuting attorney, and basically is completely agreeing with everything the guy says. So it doesn't matter that even if you're completely truthful, completely law-abiding, if somebody wants to target you for something, they can, no matter what you do. So better to not allow them that opportunity to begin with. Any information collected won't be used to your benefit. It's not going to get you exonerated. It's not going to be like, oh, we have all these charges against you, and it's like, well, just check out my cell phone records that you guys have been collecting. You can see I wasn't there. And they're not going to bring that information to court and be like, oh yeah, by the way, cell tower tracking showed that he wasn't there. So
they actually can. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the legality of it, but I find it really hard to believe that mass surveillance tools will ever come in as the cavalry to your aid. It's also subject to faults of human behavior. Things like Lovin', where the NSA was using excuse me, where NSA was using their surveillance capabilities to spy on love interests, people they were dating, things like that. They're also scraping up naked pictures of people, People send naked pictures to each other all the time. I mean, I can't even imagine how much traffic of Snapchat is illicit, whatever. I don't care if that's your thing. By all means, go for it. But just keeping in mind that those things can be scraped up and are scraped up in this mass surveillance machine is a pretty scary thought. So, is privacy really that important? After covering all that stuff, I would like to think that you are of the belief that it is. Article 12 of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes the right to privacy. It says, "No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks." So the UN thinks it's a big enough deal to include in universal human rights. So I kind of wonder why there isn't a lot more worldwide pressure against these sort of programs. There's been a lot of uproar. For instance, Germany has taken a lot of measures to try and isolate a lot of their internal networks from the global network as a whole. So there's also a website. I found this 2 or 3 days ago on Hacker News. It's called ihavesomethingtohi.de. It is an excellent resource for information on privacy, why people should care about privacy, and arguments for privacy. It dismantles the whole "I have nothing to hide" argument. Lots of quotations from people that are a lot more eloquent than myself. People like Glenn Greenwald, Jacob Appelbaum, some really outspoken privacy activists that are just amazingly smart and will be able to give you a lot more information than I'm able to.
What was the URL for that again?
I have something to hi.de.
German website.
Yep. So I also have it up there on the slide there as well. Give myself a moment to catch up on some breath. Whew. All right. So some of the core concepts of Tails are, the first is amnesic. So Tails, I think I failed to break down the acronym before. It's the Amnesic Incognito Live System. What that means is the entire operating system runs in RAM. So nothing is written to disk. There's no traces left behind on the machine that the machine was used to do anything. It's all self-contained in that sense. RAM is wiped on shutdown or reboot, so it actually goes through the full shutdown sequence. Then it loads up a microkernel where its only purpose is to wipe the entire contents of RAM and then shut down. So anytime you reboot the machine or do a shutdown, it goes through that full process. The reason for that being is it's supposed to help against a what's known as a cold boot attack. Is anybody familiar with that? So a cold boot attack, what happens is if contents of RAM are not wiped, it persists in that volatile memory for a certain amount of time after it loses power. One thing that can be done is your sticks of RAM, your memory chips, can actually be flash cooled. So take like a can of compressed air, flip it upside down, and just super chill it really fast, freeze it, and that actually enables the memory to retain the information for a longer period of time, even without power. So what they do is they'll freeze it, pull it out, put it in a forensic device that will actually scrape the contents of the memory and get a copy of that. What that means is they can get your GPG keys, they can get your passwords, they can get anything that was stored in RAM, they can see what it was and have a copy of that. So the whole purpose of the microkernel and wiping everything is to make it so that's not possible. Another interesting concept is data forensics in general. I was watching another talk from about 2 years ago about Tails that was from a forensic investigator. And some of the insights that he had on it were really interesting. Simply opening, for example, a Microsoft Word document in Windows leaves 5 different forensic traces that can be picked up on. How it was opened, when it was opened, by who, all these different things, whether it was double-clicked or opened through some other context menu or through a command line. All this stuff can be derived just from opening one document. So this that aspect of Tails is meant to really subvert all that sort of data forensic analysis.
Does it make multiple passes when it's wiping around?
No, multiple passes is usually reserved for magnetic media, just because the strength of the bit flips on a platter, the magnetic resonance is why the reasoning for the multiple passes usually. Although I'm not 100% if that's the case for solid states, but yeah, typically for instance the DoD 7-pass is for the magnetic resonance. The Gutman wipe, the 35-pass wipe, has long since been believed to be overkill, and I believe the Department of Energy standard is 3-pass, so 1 pass of ones, 1 pass of zeros, and then random. I'm not sure necessarily if it's in that order, but yeah. So yeah, just a single pass, relatively quickly. You can write over the entire contents of RAM in a very short amount of time. For instance, I have, in my Tails instances, I've been using I believe 4 gigs, and it does it in about 20 seconds. So it's really quick. The next aspect of Tails is the incognito portion. So by default, it uses MAC address spoofing. So whatever machine you're firing it up in, it doesn't use the native hardware address. It will generate a random one at boot time so that it can't necessarily be traced back to your machine. Your MAC address reveals a lot of information. The first 6 hex pairs are all dedicated to what vendor manufactured that networking device. So just by your MAC address, they can tell what kind of network card you're using, and then based on the rest of the MAC address, they can. I'm sure there's databases specifying this range of MAC addresses go to this line of devices. So the MAC address spoofing is used to subvert that. Like I mentioned before, all traffic is routed through Tor using IP tables. So the only thing that really goes out directly through the ClearNet is just the initial connection to Tor. And using things like bridges, you can connect to Tor bridges that aren't necessarily publicly published as the list of gateways normally are. So for instance, your ISP or your network administrator can see that you're connecting to Tor, but nothing else outside of that. So if you've got anybody trying to watch what you're doing outside of seeing that you're using Tor, and there's nothing really else leaked outside of that. Yeah.
Doesn't that in and of itself, won't that raise suspicion on you?
It can, and it depends on your threat model. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But yeah, if you are concerned about people being able to see that you are using Tor, at that point you would want to possibly look into things like a VPN that you would be using, or I'm trying to remember how Corridor works. I think Corridor may suffer from the same problem. One really good resource for a really deep dive on all these potential sources of leaks is the Whonix wiki. They have, it's like a 5-page table of just different comparisons between all the different anonymity technologies and what things they're subject to. And yeah, it's an amazing deep dive that's well cited, tons of resources. I wish I had a URL for that, but that's the Whonix wiki, and I believe it's comparison something or other. Just searching for those terms should be able to get you to that page. Another aspect of it being incognito and kind of sneaky is the camouflage mode. So by default, Tails runs GNOME 3, so it looks like your standard GNOME desktop. That's the screenshot on the left there. But at boot time, it presents you with an option where you can choose to use Windows 8 camouflage mode, which you can see on the right. Then looks like you're using your regular Windows 8 machine. So if you're in a public place like a internet cafe or a library or things like that, running a different operating system could tend to draw some attention. So this is to try and be a little bit more sneaky about it. Excuse me. So since it is a live system, you can install it to a medium like DVD or a flash drive, external hard drive, SD card, anything like that, and boot pretty much almost anywhere. There are some systems that do have some trouble with it, but the list of supported hardware is growing all the time, and they're usually pretty quick at resolving a lot of those issues. Especially if you submit something to like the Tails subreddit or file a bug report through their website, things like that. So included in the live system are the applications, because if you have an operating system that doesn't have any applications, great, what can you do with it? So by default, it comes with a lot of very useful software. For instance, it comes with a web browser that's based off of the Tor browser bundle, which is a derivative of Firefox. By default, it does come with NoScript, although it is not enabled. So if you want to do JavaScript blocking, you'll want to make sure to click the little NoScript button first and forbid scripts globally, because there can be information leaks from JavaScript. It does come with a mail client. It's Claws by default right now. Big warning, Claws was just revealed to have a vulnerability where clear text copies of emails, if you're using an IMAP connection, are sent to the IMAP server. So for a long time, they had intended to move to Thunderbird as a replacement, and I think this has really kind of jump-started the efforts to that. So if you are looking to use an IMAP server, you may want to do your own configuration of Thunderbird and things like that. It does come with GPG integration by default. It does come with a chat client. I think it's Pigeon, and it also has the OTR plugin enabled so that you can do off-the-record messaging. Has a Bitcoin wallet. It's Electrum. Password manager, KeePassX, document software, LibreOffice, excuse me, imaging software, so GIMP for your standard raster images, and then Inkscape for vectorized, and audio software, Audacity. So with this is basically your whistleblowers' complete self-contained system. You got phone call records that you need to do. Well, you got Audacity. You got a bunch of documents that you need to edit, LibreOffice, all that sort of stuff. So it's meant to be a self-contained, all-in-one. Hopefully, you shouldn't have to go out and try to get any packages. So trying to reduce the potential attack surface. One really cool tool that it comes with as well is the Metadata Anonymization Toolkit. You can drop whatever files you want in there, be them OGG, MP3s, doc, PDFs, JPEGs, whatever, and this tool is designed to go through and remove any potentially identifying information that isn't readily apparent. If you slap a picture of your face on there, it's not really going to do much. This is meant for all the behind-the-scenes stuff. So like geotags, creation date, modification dates, owners, things like that. So anything that you're looking to pass to the world at large and hope not to get in trouble for, you'll want to throw through this first. So with that, who is it that is normally using Tails or Tor, these anonymizing technologies? So journalists and their sources, whistleblowers, perfect example. Edward Snowden used Tails almost exclusively throughout the entire process of gathering leaks from the NSA and publishing those leaks. Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, all were required to use all of these anonymizing technologies before he would agree to disclose this information to him. Political activists and protesters. You see things like Arab Spring and Tunisia blocking Twitter and things like that, where political dialogue is attempted to be repressed by various regimes. Oddly enough, military and government agents. Tor originally was developed by the Navy as a way of getting information in and out of hostile environments. Privacy-conscious people in general. You don't want Facebook tracking you? Cool. You don't want Google tracking you? Cool. You know, use this to make yourself not as uniquely identifiable. You'll have a shared fingerprint with a larger user base that doesn't directly identify you. Librarians. There's actually a really cool project where librarians are learning how to use things like Tor and Tails so that anybody that comes to the library is able to use the internet and not be subjected to that sort of stuff. Victims of stalking and domestic abuse, battered women's shelters. There's a big effort to get them to adopt these sort of things to kind of cover their tracks and keep them safe in the real world from, people that are looking to harm them. So now we're going to get into the threat modeling portion. Basically, just trying to identify what level of security you're looking for. Are you just looking for general privacy, passive, keeping yourself safe from passive tracking and marketers? Adi had talked about the Axiom and the marketing information that is collected in the profile that they have on pretty much every American. There's a lot of companies like AT&T and Verizon are injecting what they call super cookies that they use to track every request that you make. This I would consider this the lowest tier of your threat model. This is also the level of security that I would consider running a virtual machine viable. Running things like Tor and Tails inside of a virtual machine does have some risks because your hypervisor will be able to see whatever you're doing. So if there's a known bug in your hypervisor, that could be a potential area of disclosure, as well as your host operating system, which I do not doubt that NSA has 0 days for OS X and whatever Windows version you're using. So even various Linux distros, I'm sure they sit on 0 days for a long time. This is the level at which I would say using a VM is probably safe, because I don't think that AT&T and Verizon are looking to compromise your box to get a piece of marketing info that they can sell for a very small amount. That's just the amount of effort involved to the reward is not that great. This second tier, a low-level active adversary. So say you're trying to whistleblow within a corporation. You want to be able to hide whatever you're doing from your network administrators or get information to the outside world. You're expecting that there is going to be somebody actively looking for you, especially if you've already started to disclose leaks and there's a higher level of scrutiny within the organization. This also would include local law enforcement. Excuse me. Yeah. So this definitely does take a little bit higher level of awareness because somebody is actively targeting you. Then the highest level is going to be your nation states and your three-letter agencies. So this is where whatever it is you're doing may very well result in you losing your freedom and/or your life. Activists in totalitarian regimes, if they're trying to subvert that, it's a very distinct possibility that they will be executed for that. So it really comes down to a comparison of, if I'm compromised, what do I stand to lose? If it's, oh, I could lose a job, that sucks, but it's a lot different from losing your head. So I think the amount of time that you put into researching these sort of tools should be equivalent to the risk that you're running. So yeah, if something's going to result in you having to run to Russia to keep yourself safe, then it definitely is worth, at bare minimum, several months of research to make sure that you're going to be able to do what you need to do. So to actually start using Tails, I put together an instructional handout. It's a simple PDF that one of my buddies designed for me. I actually did not run that through the Anonymizer tool. Not eating my own dog food here. So it's, yes, I'm aware that is a Google URL shortener link, and it is also hosted on a Google Drive. That's mine. I could do better at using other tools, but I went to a rally for Restore the Fourth. Is anybody familiar with Restore the Fourth? Okay, we go. Restore the Fourth is an activist group that is focused on privacy-related issues and reining in the trampling of the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizures. We went to a rally at the Bluffdale Data Center in 2013, and one of the guys there got some scrutiny from some people saying you're raging against companies like Facebook and Google, and yet you're using them to get this message out. And he said that in guerrilla warfare, sometimes you have to use their own tools against them. And I think that's a pretty cool way of looking at it. While it's not the most ideal situation, at least you are still trying to get that message out there. That QR code will take you to that Google Drive share. I have instructions on there for how to create a Tails bootable instance using Windows, Mac, and Linux. So on there, it's all step-by-step instructions. It'll walk you through downloading the image, putting it to a medium of your choice, whether that's a hard drive, flash drive, SD card, burning it to a DVD, what have you. Excuse me. Well, even prior to that, verifying that the image you downloaded is legitimate. If somebody's on the line and wants to swap out your download for one that they've compromised, how are you going to be able to track that? Well, without chasing that rabbit hole too deeply, you can get the GPG signature and verify that what you've downloaded matches the signature. So in all this, you're still inherently trusting the HTTPS connection that you're using for it, because you're getting the signature over that means, or still the HTTPS, because even if you use the torrent, which you have to get the torrent from their website, which is delivered over HTTPS, so if they wanted to slip in a compromised one that would put you to a swarm that has a compromised image, yeah, you can see how you can chase that rabbit hole for quite a long time. Some things that you can do to try to verify that what you're downloading is legitimate is getting it from multiple sources, getting it from different IP addresses, library, coffee shop, and one from home, and comparing, making sure that that key matches on all those. If you really want to find out for sure, get engaged in the web of trust. See if you can find somebody who down the chain has been signed by the Debian team. That way you have a direct link from this verification from this organization matches this. So obtaining the image, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to take a step back and look at this from the first tier of the threat model, simply because I was debating how far in depth we wanted to get with it, and ultimately settled on a beginner's guide to anonymous computing. So we're gonna take a step back and look at it from the lowest tier and follow through that way. So obtaining the image, go to their website. This is the Tails website. You can get to it from tails.baum, B-O-U-M, Bravo, Oscar, Uniform, Mike.org. On there, you're going to see that pretty green button on the right side there that says Download Tails. Mash that there button. Once you do that, it'll take you to a page and lets you download the ISO image, and you can take it from there. Once you have a working instance of Tails, it comes with this Tails installer utility. From here, you can then use that one copy of Tails to make many copies. So if you want to just boot up an instance and just start putting it on a bunch of flash drives or SD cards and handing them out to people, you can do that. Unless you explicitly trust the person who's handing you that, don't trust what they're giving you. But it's a pretty neat little way of getting copies en masse there. So one thing that Tails does have is the ability to use persistent storage. So a storage partition that will remain between different instances. So this does kind of subvert the amnesic aspect, but it's also very useful in that you can use it to keep things like your config files, Bitcoin wallet, GPG keyring, KeyPass keyring, any documents that you want to persist between sessions. If you install additional packages, that will reside in the persistent storage. With that, you actually do need to have an installation medium that will allow you to write to it. So a DVD is out of the question at that point. So let's actually talk about the installation media. What you install on does matter. And once again goes back to the threat modeling. If you don't need anything persistent and you're just looking for random web browsing and keeping yourself safe in that sense, you don't need to be able to write to it. So your best option at that point would probably be just a bootable DVD. Or an unwritable medium. We'll get a little bit to that, get to that in a little bit here. So first off, SD cards. They are writable. You can install Tails to it so that you can do the persistence. The SD card lock, that little switch tab on the side there, don't trust it. That is not a hardware limitation. When that tab is set to the lock or the do not write, it's up to the operating system whether or not it actually respects that request. And I actually had to get into a pretty deep discussion with that on Reddit one time. There was a guy who was wondering if his SD card could be written to. And yes, it can. If your host operating system becomes compromised, they can tell the driver that's used to write to the SD card, ignore that little secure flag. You know, just ignore that, go ahead and write to the drive anyway.
So sad.
And I actually had to pull up the white papers for the SD card spec to show that it is up to the operating system to determine whether or not it does that. So that is not a hardware control. Next up is a USB drive. Typically, your USB drives are going to be writable. That's expected. A lot of USB drives claim to have a hardware protect write switch. There's not really an enforcement mechanism for that. You have to trust the manufacturer. So if you grab some random write-protected USB drive off of Amazon, then yeah, it really comes down to whether or not that is a reputable hardware manufacturer. Anybody see anything wrong? Are you guys able to read that at all? There's one manufacturer of flash drives named Kangaroo, or Kangaroo. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. They've got some pretty cool features that they advertise for their flash drives. They have a remote management console. The third bullet point down there really scares the crap out of me. Deliver files to remote Defender USB drives over the internet. Why would you want your USB drive to phone home and be able to have stuff written to it? That just raises all kinds of red flags for me. Another thing that I thought was really funny was they had this Department of Homeland Security endorsement on their website that sets off all kinds of alarm bells in your head. So yeah, once again, your USB drive comes down to whether or not you really trust it. If you do want to take extra measures to try and secure yourself and do want it so your USB drive is not writable, there are devices out there called forensic write blockers. A lot of the time, these are used for data forensics. They're required to be able to obtain an unmodified image of whatever device they're imaging, whether that's a flash drive, hard drive, solid state, whatever. This device ensures that no write capability is going to that drive. So while effective, it's expensive. You're looking at least $120 for one of these devices. You can potentially make your own of these using something like a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone. I believe there was a Black Hat talk that had a USB toolkit. I think it may have actually been released as part of Bad USB. So if you do have some time and are a tinkerer, then yeah, you can try and make one of these own. But in the same sense, it kind of also falls into the same domain as writing your own crypto. Like, do you trust yourself enough to be able to write an implementation that blocks all write access? So there's that. And lastly, DVD-ROM has a couple of its own caveats that need to be taken into account. It's a lot slower than a flash drive. A lot of places are phasing this out. A lot of computers are just thin clients or no longer have optical drives at all. So if you're looking for something that you can use ubiquitously, then DVD may not be your best option. It is unwritable, so if you're worried about your host OS becoming compromised and them tampering with whatever installation medium you have, this is a good choice. Lastly, another aspect of Tails that I kind of tacked on at the end here is its integration with I2P. I2P is the Invisible Internet Project. It is basically a hidden internet within the internet. So I2P is a peer-to-peer network that is meant to be, in a lot of ways, like Tor, where it anonymizes traffic. Nobody can tell where it came from, where it's going, that sort of thing. The biggest difference between I2P and Tor is that in Tor, you're able to get to the normal, regular internet anonymously. I2P is all self-contained. You can only get to sites that are within the I2P network.
Is that like darknet?
Yeah, essentially. The term darknet has some pretty negative connotations, deep web, things like that. It's just a self-contained hidden internet is probably a better term. In order to use I2P integration in Tails, you have to enable it at boot time. So the bootloader allows you to set a custom flag. I believe it's just --I2P. Just I2P? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so you set that at boot time. The reasoning for that being is I believe it was about 4 or 5 months ago, there was a vulnerability that was revealed in the I2P client, and in order to reduce the attack surface, they decided to make that something that the user would have to opt into rather than including it by default. So how do you help with this tool? Maybe you don't need to use this yourself. Maybe you don't have concerns or needs, but you think it's a really cool project. It is open source, so you can look at any of the code, contribute back, documentation, all the typical ways of helping out with that, and probably the easiest and set and forget kind of way is donating. Organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation represent. The Guardian Project also provides funding, as well as the Freedom of Press Foundation. So all awesome organizations that are fighting for free speech, anonymity, and protecting your digital rights on the whole. With that, I believe that is all my slides. Do we have any questions or any? I have a virtual machine. I can launch up an instance of Tails so you can kind of see the boot process from beginning to end, that sort of thing. Okay. Any? What's that?
How big of an SD card would you need?
About 4 gigabytes. So yeah, it should be small enough to fit on a DVD and most USB drives. So it is lunchtime. I'm not gonna keep anyone from that. But if you do want to stick around, I can fire that up real quick. Thank you. Oh man. All right, so this is the Tails bootloader. If you do want to enable I2P, you would simply hit Tab, space, I2P. But normally it boots automatically within 3 seconds. From there, goes through your typical boot process for a Linux distro. La-di-da-di-dum. Ooh, that thing's toasty. 94 and rising. Okay, so first thing that comes up when you boot in Tails is you're presented with a screen for more options. By default, if you just hit login, it'll take you to your GNOME 3 desktop and just be your typical setup. Just for fun's sake, we'll go ahead and mark that we do want more options. From here, you can set up an admin password. By default, I'm not actually sure what the default password is. I've not actually attempted to use anything that requires administrative privileges on the default.
Persistent volume usually.
Yeah. So if it's something that you're going to be installing software with or maintaining stuff over different sessions, then you'll definitely want to set a strong password. What's that? Passphrase. Thank you. And then you can check to enable the Windows 8 camouflage mode here. I wish there were a little bit more clear way of marking that that's been enabled rather than just making the box gray. Perhaps I should file a bug for that if it hasn't been already. Then you can actually turn off the MAC address spoofing if you want. That's a special use case. If you think that having a spoofed MAC address would draw more attention to you, then that may be something that you want to do. And then if you do have trouble getting out to the Tor network, then you can use a proxy server or VPN or some other means of connecting by marking that bottom box. So we'll go ahead and just leave it with the default GNOME desktop and fire it up here. So if you are running in a virtual machine, it will yell at you. So, and before it can actually connect to Tor, it does require a synchronized clock for the SSL TLS handshake stuff. Once that has been synchronized, then it will do everything from that point forward on. Through Tor. Let's see here. Actually, I don't think I have an internet connection currently set up on my laptop. Herp derp. So just a quick look. We'll have your most used utilities up at the top: the Tor browser, mail client, chat, KeyPass, and a terminal if you need it. You can dig a little bit deeper and start looking at some of the utilities that it does include.
One thing is I find cool is like you mentioned that metadata sanitation tool.
Mm-hmm.
They include SSHFS.
SSHFS, I did not know that.
Landline. So if you wanted to connect to like say another machine over SSH, you can SSHFS into that machine.
Nice. I did not know that. That's really cool. So yeah, SSHFS included by default. That's pretty handy. From there it's your typical live Linux distro. So I wish I had a decent connection so that we could actually hop on and do the Tor check and show that we're connected to Tor, but I doubt that's really going to be doable considering the network we're on here. So.
One other thing, if I could. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I appreciate the contributions, man.
Is it has the if you don't trust your keyboard.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the virtual keyboard there, and you can actually, I believe you can randomize it as well. Let's see here.
That's threat level 3, right?
Yeah. So if you're worried about somebody doing keylogging, then you can do this. Let's see where. Oh, layout. There we go. Where's the?
Why would you want to randomize the keyboard if it's
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe if they're somehow, way, shape, or form, they're able to.
Yeah, if they're able to determine.
Through a side channel thing.
Yeah, or following your keys, your mouse movements, if they're able to determine the spacing, so you click this space, and this space, they're able to determine that's W, D, and R. Yeah. So I believe there is a way to randomize the layout. I don't know why I'm failing so hard on it right now. But
That's awesome. If you don't trust your hardware.
Yeah. So this, and that does tie into the threat modeling and how high of a security level you're looking to have. Any questions, comments, discussion? Yeah.
As far as the MAC addresses, how does it randomize those?
I'm not sure if it's 100% true random. If it just uses a PRNG to generate your what is it, 12 hex characters? Yeah. So I think it just grabs 12 pseudo-random hex characters.
So it's not necessarily recycling a list from a vendor?
I don't believe so. It would actually be interesting to look into that. I'd like to check the documentation to see how that was implemented. And I think that was just implemented, like within a year and a half ago? Yeah, it was a pretty recent development. But yeah, it is actively maintained, and I believe they try to put out releases every 6 weeks. Yeah.
Someone has to penetrate the LAN in order to make use of these MAC addresses.
Yeah, so that would be more of an instance of like a network administrator or something like that. So yeah, any other questions, comments? All right, well, thank you. What's that?